Listen, breathe in slowly, and let the voice take you where the stars hang like lamps above a sleeping city. Imagine for a moment the endless night of the galaxy, not empty, but tenderly vast. A room so large that your smallness feels like a secret kept against the dark. Each distant star is a heartbeat. Each distant world a single breath. Let your eyelids grow heavy as you drift among them, far from the noise of bustling streets and the immediate warmth of neighbors. There is the Imperium, a name whispered, like an old lullaby by those who still remember the morning. The Imperium is an ocean of steel and sorrow, a place where humanity has learned to fold itself small and bright, so it may not be lost in the cold. It stretches across light years, a tapestry of planets stitched together with iron and prayer. And though it is vast beyond imagining, there are quiet corners within it where the night seems softer, as if someone has drawn a blanket over the world and tucked in its edges neatly. Imagine one such corner. Picture a single warship, not young and new, but seasoned, its hull bearing the soft scars of time, like a parent bearing smile lines. The ship moves through the black with a measured grace. Its engines a slow, comforting thrum that vibrates through the hull as though the vessel itself were humming a gentle tune. In the corridors, light pools in soft washes. It falls on battered plating, on the handrails smoothed by the same hands that have gripped them for decades. The lights are not bright. They are the kind of gentle illumination that encourages sleep. They do not demand attention, they simply exist, constant and reliable. Listen to the ship's breathing, a low, steady pulse. Far off, beyond the hull's skin, storm lights from distant nebulas tremble like the flash of a guardian's cloak. Here, inside the vessel, everything moves with patient deliberation. The whisper of servitors tending their tasks is like a distant wind. They do not speak much. They do not need to. Their motions are ritual and soft, metal fingers performing slow chores. Somewhere below decks, a tenuous chorus of vox chatter coils and unwinds, brief, familiar strains of voice and signal, like a parent's murmur in the night. You could close your eyes and let it carry you. Time in the Imperium has a heavy, slow rhythm. Days pass in cycles measured by rituals, the ringing of distant bells, the quiet shuffling of cloistered feet, the counting of whispered prayers. There is a certain melancholy to the way the people here keep their habits. It's not the bright melancholy of remembered summers, but a soft, weathered kind. The kind that comes from knowing the sea is always there, and that storms will come and go, but the lighthouse remains. It is a sadness folded into duty, a sacrament of endurance. Walk with me now, but gently through these corridors. Feel the coolness of steel beneath your palm. Hear the far-off groan of machinery settling into night. The metal is warm in places, warmed by engine heat or by the many years it has gathered from 1,000 hands. You pass a bulkhead engraved with names. The letters are worn and smooth, the edges softened by prayers that were said and hands that lingered. Someone has placed a small token there, a scrap of cloth, a tiny carved figure. It is easy to imagine. The owner, a voice in the ship's choir, a technician with grease under their nails, a child who once laughed and hid behind a locker. There is a tenderness in these small things. They remind you that even here, amidst the cold efficiency, there is a warmth that refuses to vanish. Outside, the stars move in patient procession. Sometimes, on nights such as this, the sky is so clear that the universe feels like glass, cold, unending, and beautiful. From a distance, the galaxy looks like a map of constellations laid on a table. Close your eyes and let the image sink in. Night falling across whole worlds, each one breathing slowly, like sleepers under a quilt. There is comfort in that, a sense of belonging to something enormous and ancient. Even loneliness, when worn softly, can feel like a protective cloak. Yet the Imperium is not only steel and ritual, it is also a faith, a hushed, solemn thing that threads through the lives of its people like slow incense through a chapel. Their faith is not loud. It is the kind that shows itself in the gentle repetition of lines, in the habit of keeping one hand over the heart at sunset, in the way a worker pauses to touch a reliquary and then returns to the task at hand. It is fragile and stubborn all at once, and it keeps a light alive in many dark places, in the softer parts of the universe, the places between campaigns, between orders. There are also the tech priests and the grey-clad adepts with their mechanical murmurs. They move through the engine rooms like slow-moving constellations, their robes whispering and their oculars flickering with faint, careful lights. They seem at once foreign and familiar, as if machinery itself had learned a form of prayer. When they touch a rusted cog or speak into a dented console, it is with a reverence that borders on tenderness. To watch them is to watch someone care for an old, beloved friend. They speak to machines as if they were children, coaxing them back to sleep. And then there are the Space Marines, great soft-voiced legends in the telling. Even here, in this gentle hour, their mythic presence is a hush. Picture them as titans wrapped in armor, not to show off, but to keep themselves together. They move with the quiet of people who have learned to be still. Their steps are slow and measured, heavy with the weight of 1,000 battles. Beneath the plates and ceramite, they are warriors who once laughed, who once dreamed, who once held hands in the dark. But time has a way of smoothing those dreams like water on stones. The roughness is gone, replaced by a tempered, sober resolve. Their sacrifices are quiet, made without fanfare, and the galaxy owes them much. There is a particular elegance to the way sadness settles in this universe. It does not crash like a sudden storm. It descends, soft and powdery, like dust at the bottom of an old book. It wraps itself around people like a familiar shawl. For the citizens of the Imperium, sadness is not an enemy to be fought, but a companion on long nights. It reminds them of what they protect. Fragile human faces under hard helmets, laughter in the hollows of a barracks, stories told by the light of a single stubborn candle. And yet, for all the tenderness, there are whispers. They are thin and delicate at first, barely more than the rustling of a page. It is easy to mistake them for the ordinary noises of an old ship, a pipe settling, a fuse cooling, a distant generator catching its breath. But if you listen more closely, you might notice that these whispers are not mechanical at all. They arrive like a soft draft through a cracked window, carrying syllables that fit nowhere and everywhere. They are not hostile at first. They are curious, as if an ancient thing had cleared its throat and were testing the air. These whispers speak in threads, the way a moth's flight draws a path across a lampshade. They touch the edges of memory, a half-remembered lullaby, a fragment of a sermon, the echo of a name. They do not demand anything. They only suggest. They make you recall a face in the dark and then let you go. For a while, they are merely a gentle companion to the night, the kind of sound that would not wake a sleeping child. In that way, they lull you deeper, their barely there speech weaving an almost comforting pattern. There is a certain cruelty in such softness, because within those thin whispers a spaciousness grows, and in that space, the idea of change can take root. The change is slow. It arrives like tide water, not as a crash, but as a long, inevitable pull. A machinist pauses, fingers on a rusted conduit. An old serf looks up from his prayer. A child curls tighter under a blanket. Unseen things settle, like dust that glows faintly when the light hits it. It is subtle enough that many might never notice, except in the way dreams become a little sharper for a few nights, or a faint cold settles in the bones with the dawn. For those who belong to the chapter houses and the engine rooms, the small changes add up. A tech adept who once hummed a certain off-key hymn now hums a slightly altered version. A hymn can be a doorway. A tune can be a breadcrumb. A space marine catches the scent of iron where there used to be coriander. These details are a map drawn in whispers, leading somewhere the mind does not yet want to go. And when the map is laid out, the path looks strangely familiar, as if it had been trod once before by someone else who never returned. But let us not rush. This is, after all, the beginning of a long night. The ship rocks gently, and the world outside keeps its measured pace. The soft lights in the corridors glow like lanterns on a quiet lane. Voices on the Vox thread dim to an almost inaudible hum. People turn in their bunks, and the sound of their breathing becomes a chorus of small, steady rhythms. The sense of vastness, of being tucked within something enormous and indifferent, can be a comfort. You are not alone. You are but care of a larger thing, watched over by rituals older than memory. So let your shoulders loosen. Let the weight of the day fall away like a cloak left on the back of a chair. There is time here. Time to breathe. Time to remember that even in a realm where war is an ancient lullaby, there can be hours of fragile peace. For as long as you listen to the slow and patient breathing of the stars, you may rest. And yet, as you drift, keep a small, gentle awareness at the corner of your mind. Like the hush of leaves that heralds a coming wind, there is a feeling, barely a tremor, that the night is not entirely ordinary. It is the sensation of being observed, not with malice, but with an attentive patience. It is the impression that the galaxy, vast and indifferent, has turned an ear toward this small ship and is learning its lullabies. For now, the knowledge is a mere prickle at the back of the neck, nothing more. It is curious, not cruel. So we sleep, held in steel and ritual, in the slow, soft embrace of the Imperium. We breathe with the ship and the stars and the tired tenderfolk who keep watch. The world is melancholy and beautiful. It is full of small prayers, and the worn, bright things people keep hidden beneath their armor. And when the whispers return, they will be gentle, like someone calling your name from the next room. For this moment, let that small voice be a companion. Let it be nothing more than a neighbor knocking softly in the night. Sleep now. Let the hum of engines and the rustle of the cosmos lull you deeper. Let the memory of hands, the warmth under steel, the echo of a laugh in a corridor, settle as a soft pillow beneath your head. In the morning, perhaps, the universe will be the same, or perhaps it will have shifted, a fraction closer to some other tide. For now, there is beauty in the hush, and sorrow that comforts. There is a slow, inexorable calm. And somewhere, just beyond the rim of the ship's light, a whisper listens back. Listen again. Settle deeper, breathe, and let the rhythm of your breathing match the slow cadence of a story told by someone who has lived many winters and remembers them all at once. We will follow a long, patient thread. The story of noble men becomes something else, trimmed by time and devotion until only the shape remained, and then the shape changed. Once, they were Astartes. Imagine them at first in the softest possible light. Young recruits on a training pitch, the ghost of laughter on their lips. The warmth of hands passed between them in quiet camaraderie. They were birthed from a design, an idea of perfection. Gene seed and ceremony shaped them. Iron and prayer tempered them. Brothers bound by oaths and memory. In that memory, there was sunlight on the faces of chaplains, the smell of oiled armor in the morning, the taste of ration bread done over an open flame. These were not gods. They were men who had traded certain small things for the possibility of grandeur. Their vows were deliberate, their purpose sacrosanct. They were both instrument and guardian, a promise in ceramite. Feel that origin as if it were a warm coin placed in the palm of your hand. You can still see the lines where names were written and then softened by time. The Astartes' earliest days were rhythm and discipline, training and the slow, shared silence of men who understand that some words are useless in the face of what they must do. They were taught to hold the line, to stand between humanity and a cosmos that yawns and seeks to swallow warmth. Their compassion was compact, like a candle hidden beneath armor, not often seen, but stubborn and persistent. But the galaxy is a patient thing. It does not hurry. It does not plead. It waits. Power, when it arrives, is rarely abrupt. It is more often a small offering, left at the edge of one's dreams, a whisper in the ear when vigil is thin, a vision flashed in a broken machine, a promise that hovers like steam over a cauldron. Drink, and you will be stronger. Give, and you will be kept. The trade is never as simple as coin for bread. It begins with loss measured in degrees, a word, a memory, a private warmth folded away. Imagine sometime later a captain kneeling in an empty chapel. He prays and the words crumble. He feels a pressure at the base of his skull, Like the first bite of winter, the warp answers back, but not with thunder. It offers a small mercy, an extra push of focus, a clarity in the heat of battle. The captain hears the counsel as if it were his own thought, a way to be more precise, to spare his men more often. Such a favor might seem subtle. Who would refuse better aim or steadier hands when the next mission demands them? Small choices gather. Momentum collects like dust. One man takes a subtle gift and keeps it, then passes in battle with a little more ferocity, a little more ruthlessness. Another, watching that ruthlessness, feels the sting of envy, then the relief of possibility. The warp is patient. It plants suggestions like seeds. Those seeds bloom into rituals. Rituals are the heartbeat of transformation. They begin with things that look almost familiar: the polishing of relics, the recitation of oaths, the steady tapping of gauntlets upon plated thighs. You can imagine them being performed in the hush after dusk, when men are tired and their defenses thin. The ritual may seem harmless at first. A sigil traced in solder on a helm, a line of runic chalk across a doorway, the soft murmur of words in a tongue half remembered. Such acts carry weight because they are repeated. Repetition wears away resistance. The things that once felt foreign become domestic, like a second skin. In time, what was domestic changes the skin's color. Armor, once immaculate ceramite, accrues marks that cannot be buffed away. Someone carves a symbol into a pauldron's edge, and another traces his fingers along it out of curiosity. The mark is simple: a curl, a line, a twisted knot. It is small enough to be explained away. Yet in the dark, under candlelight, the sign gleams faintly, as if inked by something that is not wholly of this world. Such marks are a language, the grammar of a new allegiance. They knot men together in ways that oaths might never have done, binding them to currents that run beneath the visible world. Weapons change too. The bolter keeps its roar, but now it sounds like a litany. The blade of a power sword is not only for cutting, it is an instrument used in rites where blood is given as payment, and memory is erased as fee. These weapons learn to speak. When they are new, the voices are low, a hum in the throat of the metal. Later, if you stand too close, you might hear the metal say the names of those it has taken. The implements of war become reliquaries for something else, a history written in suffering, an archive of bargains. Warbands form. They call themselves many things: chosen names, ironic names, names that sound like prayer and like laughter at once. A warband may begin as a small band of brothers who have been pushed together by a single campaign. It becomes, over the years, a thing with a name and banners and a roster of deeds. Their banners are not splendid. They are intimate things, stained with salt and ash. On them are embroidered symbols that do not belong to any chapter heraldry. The sigils twist and stretch like vines. They are not aggressive. They are patient, and patient makes converts. Each warband develops its own rituals, its own liturgy. Some carve their helmets with runes that hold the memory of a particular battle. Others affix charms of bone and wire and machine, knotted with sinew from beasts found on far planets. In ceremonies that happen in deep night, the warband will assemble. They stand around a brazier and pass out objects: a tooth, a coin, a rusted cog. And each object is naming a sin and a promise. They do not speak of home. They speak of futures they will make with power and with ruin. The tone of such meetings is oddly intimate. They fold affection and cruelty into a single gesture. A brother who has been favored by the warp may lay his hand upon a plate and feel a warmth run up his arm as the mark inside his flesh glows. Others watch and learn, and the watching is its own kind of hunger. If you listen to the Knights of the Warband, you will notice rhythms in their speech. They whisper names into the darkness, names that do not belong to living men. They hum tunes that are like old lullabies with a single wrong note. The wrongness is soft at first. It is like the taste of rain on the tongue after a long drought, surprising and then gratifying. The wrong note becomes a key, and the key unlocks further changes. The body becomes an instrument to be tuned. Augmentations follow. Flesh makes room for machinery. And the machinery is a scripture that tells a different story than the one they once told each other. This is an important point. The trade is not only spiritual or metaphysical. It is the slow remapping of a man's body and mind. Consider the change as if examining a map with ink bleeding beyond the borders. A veteran might begin to modify his armor in private, inserting strange alloys or ancient runes into seams where soot and sweat do not reach. Servitors bend and shape new components quietly in hidden workshops. The more such modifications take root, the less the veteran sleeps in ways that matter. His dreams are crowded with static and water, with a chorus of wires that sing in his skull. He wakes different, his hands remembering tasks they have not yet been taught. The loss feels like erosion. Memory wears thin, childhood images, hands at a hearth, a woman's laugh, the smell of bread, become artifacts. They can be summoned, but they are brittle. Each summoning requires sacrifice, a memory, a mercy. It is a ledger that some cannot resist balancing. In the place of what is lost, something else grows. A capacity for violence, sure, but also a new kind of devotion. Devotion redirected becomes worship. Power becomes liturgy. The Space Marine, once a guardian of men, begins to see himself as a vessel for something greater than humanity. Something that promises a clarity beyond the fog of compassion. There is an elegance to this corruption. It blooms like a fungus, quietly and persistently. It does not announce itself with banners and trumpets. Instead, it changes the way a man ties his boots, the way he clears his throat before a command, the way he folds his hands at night. The hands once used for handling children now learn to press sigils into bone, to steady a blade as it is taken from one throat and offered to another. It is both tender and monstrous, a double motion. Rituals, once again, are the connective tissue. We will watch one such ritual now, slowly, as if peering through frosted glass. Imagine a low-ceilinged chamber lit by an oil lamp. The walls are hung with tokens, dented flasks, ceremonial helms, braided wires. At the center, a brother kneels before a low brazier. He holds a blade of curious metal. Its edge is dull to the eye, but, when whispered over, sings like a bell. He lifts the weapon and allows his blood to fall upon it. The blood hisses, and steam rises that smells faintly of rust and roses. The others around him murmur a cadence that is almost prayer. They are not asking the blade for strength so much as they are conversing with it, coaxing it to accept what it will carry. In these acts, the line between man and relic narrows. A voice from the warp, a voice that is rarely loud, may put a single word into the brother's head. Remember, or obey, or become. It is as simple and as devastating as the suggestion to close one's hand around cold iron in the middle of a hard night. Once the suggestion is accepted, the brother performs an action whose meaning will not be fully known until months or years later. He carves a mark into his helmet. He slaughters a beast and keeps one tooth as a charm. He burns a page from a sacred book. Symbols proliferate. They are carved into pauldrons and etched into bolters. They blossom like frost across the edges of shin plates. Each symbol is a sentence in a language that only those who have been touched can fully read. For outsiders, they are merely odd, unsettling. For the men who bear them, the symbols sing with familiarity. They provide comfort in the dark and meaning in the chaos of battle. They are, in a sense, an intellectual prosthetic, a way to make sense of what happens when the world will not answer in human terms. The warp gives, and the warp takes. The gifts are seductive because they are useful, better reflexes in combat, a surge of insight that allows a commander to outmaneuver an enemy fleet, a whispered promise that you will not feel pain the way others do. These are not illusions. They are real, yet they come with a cost not written in any ledger, but paid in slow withdrawals from the accounts of the self. You may trade away the memory of your sister's face and gain the sight to pierce an enemy's armor. You may lose the taste of bread and gain the ability to command legions. These trades are convincing because they are efficient, and efficiency is its own kind of absolution. Now imagine the moment when a man can no longer tell whether a thought is his or borrowed. He finds himself speaking in a cadence he has never practiced. He dreams with the same phrase repeated until it becomes language. When he wakes, his hands know a pattern of motion that he cannot explain. He reaches for a relic, and his muscles respond as if trained. The alien becomes intimate. The foreign becomes the only lodestar. That is when the transformation is nearly complete. Yet even in the deepening shadow there remain fractures. Some resist, as stone resists water for a time. There are men who refuse certain rites, who burn the sigils from their armor and hide away the charms. They keep vigil in the old ways, reciting prayers and telling stories of what they were. There is nobility in this, a quiet stubbornness that is both admirable and fragile. But the cosmos is a clever teacher. It finds ways to reach around resistance. It offers small comfort to the resolute. A warm night when the cold would otherwise bite. Safe passage through a gauntlet where others fell. Resistance is often lonely. Temptation is social. One man's acceptance makes another's refusal more difficult to maintain. And then there are the days when the man who refused hears the laughter of his old brothers from beyond a brazier. They call to him with familiar nicknames, with stories of old violence and camaraderie. and the way the galaxy feels when you are more than human. The laughter sounds like home. He is tempted not only by the promise of power, but by the desire to belong again, to close the gap between himself and those he loved. The warp exploits that need as deftly as it does any weakness. It is important to watch what happens to the face, to the voice, to the cadence of the man as the trade continues. The visage is often the last thing to change. At first, the expression is the same as any veteran's, measured, laconic. In private, the man may smile. The smile is practiced, a memory of warmth rehearsed until it fits. Later, a twitch begins at the corner of the mouth. A scar maps the cheek. Eyes grow deeper. Their color may shift, a faint glint seeping across the iris. Under certain lights, you might perceive a sheen as if a membrane lies across the pupil, the sort of thing that suggests something else watches through the glass. The voice changes more slowly, but more persistently. It tightens at the edges. It takes on cadences that are not human. The staccato of machine, the long vowel of something older than language. When these men speak in council, their words fall like spent bolts, efficient, deadly, and cold. To listen is to be aware that meaning is not always in what is said. It is in the silences between words, in the way a hand hovers over a relic and then retreats. Warbands roam. They seek, they find, they enact and reenact the bargains they have made, sometimes with armies, sometimes with scrap metal priestesses on dead worlds. Their actions are at once tactical and devotional. A raid can be a communion. A slaughter is sometimes a sacrament. The lines blur because the men inside the armor intend them to blur. They are no longer merely soldiers. They are vessels tuned to a frequency that hums beyond the material. And in the warp, where sympathy is currency, whispers become voices. These are not always explicit. They are rarely bellowed as demands. Instead, they weave suggestions, images, half-memories. In the dark, a brother may hold up his hand and see a sequence of scenes imposed upon his mind. A city on fire, a face smiling, a sword planted in soil. Each image has the quality of a memory, but does not belong to the man. It is a borrowed recollection, a script placed into a play that he has been invited to star in. These images are dangerous. They are replicable. They spread like a tune learned by heart. Brothers start to hum the same notes in camp. Their dreams overlap. They find each other at midnight and, without words, perform rituals that are both tender and terrible. They feed the machine with small offerings, a memory of mother, a stolen laugh, the feeling of sun on skin. In return, they receive a higher clarity, the ability to direct a missile with a thought, to shrug off fatigue in the middle of a siege. It works, and because it works, many of them call it salvation. If you have followed this far, you may feel a small, steady apprehension. That is fitting. The transformation is seductive precisely because it masks itself as usefulness, as care for the men who fall to the endless wars. But the more you accept, the less you belong to the old categories of humanity. The heart remains, in a manner of speaking, but it beats to a new rhythm. It is not wrong to imagine grief there. It is not wrong to imagine the slow ache of people who remember what they once were and cannot fully reclaim it. Now, listen for the last layer. The symbols carved into armor, the whispers in the warp. The symbols can be faint, almost decorative when seen in daylight. But at night, when the lamps are low and the mind is quiet, they seem to swell. They move across plates like vines. Sometimes they are not only surface deep, they are worked into the alloy itself, into the very grain of the metal, where they become impossible to remove without violence. To try and scrape them away is to cut into the essence of the thing, and the essence does not like being cut. When the warp whispers, it is like wind through reed. It has no face, but it suggests faces. It makes a name feel familiar and then asks whether you would like to meet again. It murmurs in the ear of the doubter and gives them a memory of a victory they never actually saw. It offers solutions to impossible problems. For those who are already half convinced, the whispers are balm. For those who resist, they are the carbon that burns their edges away, slowly and persistently. So the noble Astartes becomes something other. The procession is not dramatic in the way legends make it. There are no sudden betrayals, no grand proclamations. The changes are surgical, domestic. They happen in long nights, in private workshops, in the hush of the engine room where servitors keep their watch. The sky is the same as it ever was, but inside men's heads, weather changes, storms gather, the world tilts imperceptibly, and if you listen very carefully now, with that same patient ear you used to hear the ship breathe, You will hear the faintest of sounds, not the clatter of a bolter, nor the rattle of a chainsword, but the small, inner music of a thing that has been altered. It is a hum, a note that sits under words and under prayer. It is the sound of a universe making a claim. You should not be alarmed yet. The first contacts with the warp are exquisite. Imagine a note that is both sweet and bitter, like smoke from a dying fire. It speaks of memories not yet owned, the sound of a brother's laugh from a childhood you did not have, the scent of citrus from a market that has never existed. It offers reminiscence as a kind of comfort. The Marines, who have given so much of themselves, accept these gifts, because what else can they do? A gift is a gift. It is polite to receive it, but the warp is not one thing. It is also hunger. Its melodies are manipulative. Its offerings are strings. Where the Marines take a memory, a warmth, a shard of exhilaration, the warp takes something of equal measure somewhere else. It carves space in the soul to make room for this new thing, and the gap left behind is subtle at first, a hesitation, the barest flinch when a brother calls a familiar name. Later, the gap becomes a silence. A memory is missing, like a tooth pulled in sleep. Let us listen to the inner life for a moment. Imagine a Marine kneeling at his locker on a night when the ship rocks and the stars are unkind. He opens the locker and sees, folded neatly between a set of fresh vambraces and a prayer book, a small ribbon he did not remember being his. He traces it with a thumb, and suddenly the world shifts. He recalls a face, a laugh, a moment when he felt warmth in the shoulder of a friend. The remembrance blooms and then is clipped, like a vine cut before it can flower. He feels a tug at the edges of his mind. Something has taken the thing in exchange for a surge of strength in his legs, an uncanny steadiness to his aim. He stands and cannot remember the shape of the laughter, only the echo of it. These changes manifest physically over evenings and weeks. Muscles tighten where they were once loose with comfort. Joints that used to ache now lock with a satisfying click as if in proper place. Eyes sharpen, pupils focus. But somewhere, a laugh is less likely to be remembered. Names that once meant something, father, sister, friend, slip into the abstract. The soldier learns to accept it. He is told there is purpose in sacrifice. He believes it because belief is easier than grief. As the mind pairs itself for function, new psychologies emerge within the ranks. The Marines become less reliant on memory and more on ritual. The rituals, vows recited in the dark, the polishing of boots until they shine like mirrors, the exact quoting of battle tactics, become scaffolding for identity. There is a strange serenity in that exchange. Lose the clutter of small things and gain the precision of role. But such trade-offs leave hollows, and hollows attract other things. Where there is space, the warp's tendrils can touch. They coil around an absence and whisper like ivy across brickwork. The echoes in the warp shift from flattering tunes to suggestions. They no longer only offer lost laughter. They begin to murmur of kinships that could be remade, of victories that could be won before the first shot is fired. They promise certainty, and certainty is seductive. A leader hears the promise in his head, like a bell ringing just below hearing. He thinks he is alone with it. In truth, he is in company. The whispers grow more pointed. They name strategies. They suggest names to chisel into armor. They point to secret caches of munitions never catalogued, and to relics that will yield swift advantage. Each suggestion has a cost that no one mentions up front. The Marine acts, and the plan works. The victory is clean and swift. The praise that follows is warm and immediate. He gives a little more because the reward is evident. The warband changes, slowly at first. One man disappears from his bunk for a while. They find instead a new glyph stitched into his tabard. Another will wake with a new mantra whispered into the cavities of his skull, a phrase that matches the cadence of their marching. They repeat it, and it becomes their armor. There is an intimacy to this kind of corruption, as if the warp were using a lover's tactics. It tends, it pampers, It promises. It feeds the needs of those who have sacrificed most, and in rewarding them, it takes claims that unravel like threads. One memory becomes two. A man's recollection of his mother's voice is no longer clear. He might hear the cadence, but not the words. Or he might feel the warmth of holding someone's hand, but not whose hand it was. And still, they fight. They fight with an elegance that is at once terrifying and mesmerizing. The combat choreography of a warband that has traded much is precise beyond human capacity. They anticipate one another's movements, a ballet of violence and metal. There is poetry in the way they fold space between themselves and their enemy, like actors who know the turns of the script by heart. The warp supplies them with foresight in small measures. A twitch in an opponent's shoulder is noticed before it happens. A path through a ruin appears in a mind a breath before the footfall. It is intoxicating. The Marines call it grace. They believe they have earned it, but there are costs that do not announce themselves until the quiet comes. After a victory, in the spaces between the roars and the cheering, something else crowds into the air, a scent like singed hair, the taste of iron in the mouth, a low hum that inhabits the teeth. In the long hours after battle, the Marines stand silent in rings, staring into the dying light. They might laugh in the moment. There is bravado and the heat of adrenaline. But later, in the hush of night, they find that their hands are not the same as they were. Fingers twitch with need. Eyes see things at the edge of the dark that are not there for others. A man might wake to find his name rearranged in his mouth, as if another tongue had tasted it. These are the early signs. They are not loud. They are not meant to alarm. They are meant to acclimatize. The mind will heal what it can, and will accept what it cannot. In the quiet, the Marines begin to speak differently. Their speech is punctuated by words in another tongue, old languages whose consonants bite at the palate. They do not teach these words to one another openly. They repeat them in half-sleep, as if reciting a recipe that must be remembered for a guest. If you listen closely, you might catch them, whispered against the metal of a locker, the cadence soft and almost apologetic. One of the subtle horrors of this stage is how normal everything seems. The Marines still perform their duties, the engines still hum, the chaplains still speak. A novice who walks the corridors might speak to one of these veterans and find the exchange entirely ordinary. The veteran will smile at the newcomer and give practical advice about cleaning a feed line or polishing a visor. If at that same moment the veteran's fingers twitch in a way they never used to, the novice will think it is fatigue and move on. Everything still functions. Function is the great anesthetic. Yet there is a growing sense of being watched, an attentiveness that is not always human. It is not the surveillance of a captain checking on a subordinate's guard, but something more patient and less human. The watchers observe not to command but to learn, to taste the rhythm of ritual, and to find places where a small, precise influence might alter an outcome. The Marines catch themselves feeling eyes upon them in empty rooms. They will turn and see only the dented plating, the drip of condensate, the small, polite scuttle of a maintenance servitor. But the feeling persists. It is not cruel, it is curious, as if something is studying the way the living arrange their grief. These watchers can be manifest or subtle. In the dark of an engine room, a man might sense a presence, something like the weight of a palm, yet without fingers. A wordless counsel in a throat that is not wholly him suggests fixes to a failing circuit. At times the counsel helps. At times it asks for a name to be written on a list. What are the lists for? The Marines do not always choose to ask. Curiosity is an expensive exercise in war. They comply, because the assistance is efficient, and their enemies are not. The name goes on a list, the circuit is mended, and a month later, a relic in the armory glows just a degree brighter when held. So the stages close in, one upon another. Ritual for comfort, augmentation for strength, the warp's gifts for advantage. Each is small, each is defensible, each seems to have merit. But like frost working its fingers across glass, the damage is incremental and inevitable. The man who sacrificed a memory for steadier hands cannot feel that memory vanish any more than one can feel an old scar fade. He knows only that there is less of himself than there was, and more of something else. And in this interim, the whispers swell from pleasant murmurs to solicitous insistence. They become patterns, and patterns become liturgies. The Marines learn to hum in answer. The hum is not entirely theirs. It begins as a subconscious thing, a matching of resonance. They notice the way the air vibrates in specific frequencies, and they match it. They find themselves repeating certain phrases before battle. They carve symbols into helmets with fingers that move as if by habit. The carvings are precise, and the hands do not tremble. They do not see anyone else doing it, but when morning comes, the glyphs are there and no one can remember their first stroke. The horror here is not immediate. It lives in the small eddies of life. It is a slow erasure of the human margin, an elegant thrift that leaves a pure, efficient thing in its wake. It is comfortable and terrifying because it is sensible. What single person can object to a brother who is steadier in his aim, whose armor shines like a beacon? Who would refuse a technique that keeps a planet from falling? The Marines trade, and the trades are accepted. They are not coerced, they are rewarded. But trade is not mutual. It is a market that has only one currency, what you are willing to lose. And as the list grows, the currency grows scarcer. The Marines give more, the Watchers learn more. And in the thin hours before dawn, when the ship rocks and the stars are far and indifferent, there is a murmur among the ranks, a sense of being measured, sampled, catalogued. The man who was once whole will find himself less whole for the gain he sought. We will stop here for a moment and breathe into the darkness with a slow, steady inhalation. The changes we have described are not the end but a beginning, a foundation on which something larger might be built. The space that grows inside those who have traded is a place where echoes sink, where the warp can call home. It is quiet, it is precise, and for those who have given their smiles and their songs, it feels strangely like salvation. Yet salvation here is a double-faced thing. It gives to take. It promises healing while feasting on the tender. It gives the warrior aim and breaks his memory. It gives the artificer sight and dulls his laughter. Over time, the things that were most human are found missing, taken in exchange for an efficiency that brooks no dissent. Listen closely now. Hear the distant hum deepen, a frequency under the frequency, like a second heartbeat in the hull. It is the tone of the warp leaning close. It is not yet hunger in a way you would fear. It is merely attention. It notes the steady rhythm of ritual and begins to match it. The watchers that observed from the edges of perception step closer. Their hands are polite and patient. Their voices are soft and patient. They do not shout, they insinuate. And as they insinuate, the Marines answer. They begin to place honors upon their armor, not merely to mark victory, but to bind themselves to something else. They write names in margins and then scratch them away. They chant in corridors. Their eyes catch at edges of reality and see shapes that had not been there the day before. Sometimes a brother will report a dream of a child with a face that he cannot place. Sometimes he will report a dream of light that is blue and wrong. They shrug and go to duty, and in the doing of duty, the dreams become less real until they are only a taste when the night returns. There is a singular terror in the way it all seems reasonable. It is the terror of a clockwork spider spinning a golden web and calling it art. Everything is given an explanation: necessity, survival, gain. And so the warp's presence becomes not monstrous but practical, a new tool in a toolbox that has always included cruelty. The Marines do not perceive the tool turning into the hand that wields them. We will end this section on a quiet note, but with a small, lingering chill. The Marines move through their days, precise and beautiful as a funeral procession, a ballet of function. The whispers in the warp have become a hush in their ears. And in the hush there is a language of touch, symbols traced at midnight. The press of a stranger's palm that is not a hand at all, the warmth of a memory that does not feel like one's own. Each trade is made willingly. Each gain is attended by loss. Each choice narrows the man until he stands as a perfected instrument, perfectly fit for slaughter. And below all of this, beneath the polished armors, beneath the chanted liturgy, beneath the mechanized work and the borrowed memories, there is a simple, terrible fact. Someone or something is learning the music of their hearts. It is not a quick learner. It is a patient tutor. It waits, it listens, it keeps the beat until the Marines begin to march to it without thinking. Now, breathe out slowly. Let that knowledge settle in the cool of your lungs. There is no need to flinch. We have only described a beginning. The hollowing and the melody, the slow trades, the soft attentions. In what comes next, the shadows will grow longer, and the watchful presence will show itself with more confidence. For now, the Marines are still in part themselves. They still sing. They still remember, if less and less. And they still believe they act for the good of many. We will continue soon, but for now, hold that steady pace. Rest into the small unease, as into a cloak. Let the sound of gears and whispered hymns cradle you. The night is not over. It has merely shifted its weight. When we go further, the changes will call louder, and the shape of the thing that has been listening will become clearer. For now, lie quiet and let the murmur of the warp be a distant, almost companionable hum at the edge of sleep. Breathe slowly. Let each inhale be an even step, a measured tide. The world you are in is familiar. The ship's steady thrum, the measured rituals, the hush between watches. But breathe in again, deeper, and notice how the edges of those familiar things begin to tremble ever so slightly. The tremor is small, at first no more threatening than the passing of a distant storm. It is the sound of the warp leaning in, and it comes as a whisper that gathers in the joints of the ship and in the hinge of a chapel door. The whisper grows patient teeth. It does not rush. It listens and learns the cadence of every step. It begins by copying a rhythm, the staccato tick of footfalls, the measured chant of a brother in the chapel, the soft clack of servitor hands. The imitation is gentle, flattering even, like a friend who takes up your favorite tune to make you smile. You let it. It is easy to let it. It is easy to accept attention when one has been so often left to the dark. And then the chord shifts. Voices arrive where whispers once hid. Not the flattering mimicry you might expect, but layered, multiple, a chorus that one can't quite locate. At first they are like echoes in a long corridor, voices rebounding off banks of metal, a murmur from a reliquary, a sigh from a power plant vent, a static lay signal from a vox that should be silent. They gather in the spaces between thoughts. You think of nothing, and the voices fill the gap with images that are almost memories. A child's face the color of dust, a battlefield ringed in blue fire, a hand pressed to a throat, and the smell of burnt sugar. Listen. The voices are not only new sounds, they are textures. They fold around the mind like silk, then harden at the edges like wire. They offer names, details, victories, secrets. They speak in languages that are at once ancient and brand new, in consonants that taste like iron. They do not shout, they seduce, and seduction is always harder to resist than force. There is a first time you hear one voice alone, clear and close as if beside your ear. It says your name, maybe not the name you were given at birth, that small private sound that fits like a hand in childhood, but a version of it, a carved form that sits nicely in the mouth, smooth and proper and slightly wrong. It says the name and then it tells you something you half wanted to hear, a promise of order, a certainty in the chaos of wars. Stick with me, it seems to say. I will make you precise. I will make your aim true. The voice tastes like cold water on a hot day. You believe it for a moment. You answer with a small assent, and the world rearranges itself around that assent. When voices grow into argument, the air changes. The ship's brass begins to vibrate on frequencies it had never known. The voxnet shivers. Instruments that once read simple pressure now chart impossible harmonics. Engineers look at their consoles with a kind of patient awe, as if the panels have started to sing back. Items in the armory hum with a low resonance that makes a man's teeth ache. When he grips a bolter, it feels as if the metal has been waiting for his hand all its life. Space itself becomes pliant. Corridors that you once knew by memory begin to lengthen by the inches that exist only to the wandering mind. A ladder you climbed one evening is suddenly 2 steps longer when you come back at midnight. Doorways shift in the dark, just enough to suggest a new geometry. The ship is learning to breathe differently, and as it does, the lights take on a different timbre. The steady amber of comfort is threaded with a cold, crystalline blue that sketches new shadows along the floor. Outside, the stars mutter and contort. The warp's weather turns. It makes the universe's edges fold like paper. A planet that should be low on the horizon carves a new crescent. Space is not merely a place of emptiness now, but of moods. The sky itself seems to frown and then to smirk. Where once there were constellations, there are now patterns that look like red sigils seen through a smear of oil. Those who watch the heavens at night, navigators and seers, the librarians who listen with oculars and charts, feel their instruments register new lines. They are cautious at first, because secrecy and caution are part of their trade. But secrets, once offered by many voices, are shared like bread, and with altered space come altered landscapes. The world beyond the ship's hull may not be physically changed in the way a sculptor alters clay, but perception is a potent hand. Ruins seen from orbit rearrange their towers. What was a collapsed hall is a closed gate when you descend. The familiar ruin of a cathedral might show a doorway that was not there the day before. A doorway that smells faintly of iron and sugar. The ground will give a little underfoot, as if some coiled thing beneath is shifting gears. Demonic intrusions begin as small accidents. A maintainer finds a bolt with too many threads. A painting of a saint shows a smudge that moves when you are not looking. A servitor, once obedient beyond question, lingers at a console and tilts its head as if listening to a tune beneath the machine breath. Such things are easy to patch over at first. Replace the bolt, repaint the saint, reboot the servitor. But the patches do not hold. The warp returns, and with it a tenacity that mortals are not built to resist. It reweaves and reshapes faster than repair squads can undo it. The Marines who had taken pride in their tidy armor and clean banners find themselves with unfamiliar filaments woven into the underlayers. Filaments that pulse faintly against the skin. Flesh answers in its own ways. At first, it is a minor twitch, a finger that spasms with the thought of a name. It is a muscle that tightens and does not relax. A tendon with a careful mechanical click. Then it becomes more. Scalpel lines previously hidden beneath the plating start to throb with warmth. Augmentations that were installed for efficiency take on a life other than their human purpose. A hydraulic joint begins to purr with a low hunger. Tendons fuse with cable as if cords and sinew find each other amicable and natural. The boundary between human tissue and machine becomes a seam that is smoothed by unseen hands. Where there was once a clear hinge of bone and flesh, now there is a new geometry of metal and marrow. Feel the rhythm of that change. A tightening, a metallic breath, a wetness at the corner of vision that tastes of iron and ozone. The surgeon's lights in the med bay are too white, too sharp. They cut with precision, but the cuts close with an odd eagerness, as if the wound prefers the embrace of metal. A stitched line that should scab over becomes glossy and plated, as if a new keratin grows beneath the epidermis and hardens. Men who once bled red show a darker, thicker fluid that coils up like ink through tubing. The servitors, designed to mend, sometimes do not. They hesitate in their movements and then, with something almost like deliberation, run a tool across skin and leave in its place an iridescent mesh that runs like lace beneath the surface. You will want to imagine only the outward changes, the bulging cables, the clink of added plates, but the horror runs deeper. The sensors recalibrate. Sight becomes sharper and more literal. Color saturates in ways that make the world too bright. Sound grows layered. Every clank has an undertone that makes the teeth ache. Taste shifts. Salt tastes like rust, bread like ash. Even smell changes. The sweet, human scents of oil and sweat are taken for granted, replaced by the clean, antiseptic tang of bioresins and ozone. And through all this change, the voices never stop. They have moved from offering to instructing. Commands are not heavy-handed at first. They are polite, precise. Turn the dial 3 notches, they will say. And the engineer, hearing not only with ears but with something deeper, obeys without question. The obedience is partial at first because the human mind pries and probes, but the warp's voices are patient. They repeat, and repetition becomes ritual. Over time, those instructions become sacred. The Marines begin to adopt the voice's syntax as part of their own liturgy, weaving the phrases into the daily prayers and the recitations of their combat drills. The syllables take root. The formation of ritual is one of the most beautiful and most dangerous things to witness. In a chapel, under the soft glow of prayer lamps, a small group of brothers will stand and chant a new stanza. The words are unfamiliar, but they roll out easily, as if learned in infancy. The cadence is hypnotic, their hearts slow to match it. The chant becomes a binding. It smooths the jagged edges of doubt. The words are small locks, and when enough charms are clasped, the warp slides through like light through a keyhole. This is when the demons begin to be seen plainly, once only everywhere and nowhere. Now they are local, intimate, and grotesquely domestic. They do not always present as hulking monsters. Sometimes they are fine and small, like insects that have learned to think in the soft math of souls. A demon might look like a stain on the floor, and then flick its wings and become a shimmer, then a face. It might be a whisper curling in a vent, a voice like a father from childhood, or it might reveal itself in something grotesquely tender, a loving hand that is not a hand. In the lower decks, a marine wakes to find a thing sleeping beside him that looks for all the world like a child. Its skin is wrong, flower white and veined as if with ink, but its breathing matches the rhythm of the ship. It murmurs a phrase in a tongue the marine half understands, and the marine reaches out and clasps its small hand. When his fingers close, they find the skin is both rubbery and warm, and under that skin, the pulse is the same as his own. He laughs softly, and the thing smiles back with too many teeth. Later, alone, he remembers that no child has been on that deck in years. The memory is movie mangled. The edges are wrong. He cannot place the face. He buries the memory under drills, and it grows sharp in the dark. Mutation is not always dramatic at first. It often begins as an accommodation, a convenience. An eye lens develops a second iris that opens only to a certain frequency. A gauntlet grows a notch in its palm, and the notch seems to form the imprint of someone else's initials. The notch becomes a socket, and the socket blossoms into a port. The port hums with a soft contentment. A brother will find a small plate of organic matter fused to his collarbone, and it is warm to the touch. When he places his hand over it, a whisper in his head says, "We can help." He presses harder, and the plate opens like a mouth and offers a filament that slips into his veins. The sensation of invasion is not always bleak. Sometimes it is deliciously pleasurable. A graft that eases pain brings tears of relief. A cybernetic implant that allows one to hear a whisper in the dark is a thing of wonder. Pleasure encourages further compliance. The warp and its demons are expert therapists in this dark salon. They coax, they ease, they suggest one small improvement and watch the gratitude bloom. Gratitude is the silkiest hand that places an extra chain on a wrist. It is the easiest rope to bind a man with. The truly terrible transformations are not only bodily, but social. The warbands that once moved as families take on new hierarchies that have little to do with birth or honor. The ones who yield fastest to the voices, who accept the whispers and the offerings with gratitude, and who make the first painful grafts without complaint, find themselves elevated. They are given positions of quiet power, a place beside the captain in the chapel, the right to touch a relic, a private stash of rare munitions. Their eyes gleam, and everyone else notes it as merit. It is merit that smells faintly of fever dream. Those who resist at first, who refuse the first ministrations, find themselves marginalized. They are watched with a mixture of curiosity and pity. At times, pity becomes predation. A resistant marine may wake to find his locker rifled, and a note in a language he does not own slipped into his gauntlet. The note is a line of a chant. He dismisses it and tapes the locker shut. When he opens it again, the note has moved to his chest plate, and the letters glow faintly in the dark. Resistance becomes lonely, and lonely becomes brittle. In the end, even the stubborn will yield to the knowledge that a curated gift can make a life of battles less bloody, and so the social fabric frays into new patterns. Warbands are no longer simply brothers in arms. They are networks of favor and debt, and the warp's currents. Power circulates not only through rank, but through secret liturgies and private rituals. The warp's voices become the quiet administrators of reward and obligation. They whisper and play favorites. They decide who will live a long life and who will be made an example. They are clever. There are moments, brief and terrible, when the Marines realize they are not the authors of their actions. A captain will wake from a trance and find his plan already drawn on a map in ink that was not there the night before. He will discover that he has committed to a strike he does not recall endorsing. His stomach will twist with recognition. He will confront a brother and find that the brother's eyes are clouded and that he speaks in 3 tongues at once. The captain feels the ground drop away under his feet. He steps and there is no purchase. The world tilts. Panic moves like an infection at this point. With panic, the senses sharpen and then betray. Sight becomes too precise. You can see the threads of the warp's presence like filaments of spider silk. You can see where a demon has been pressed against a soldier's chest. Sound slices like knives. Each whisper is a needle. The minds of men begin to tear in small places. Memories drop out. Names are replaced with numbers. Faces become geometry. The Marines find that they can no longer trust what they see in each other. They touch, and the skin yields differently. They look in a mirror, and the face looking back has small, delicate grooves beneath the skin that were not there a week before. Machines deepen the betrayal. Power armor, once a bulwark, becomes a symbiotic prison. Seam and joints slide into new alignments. Plates match flesh and wish to hug it forever. Armor's HUDs flash strange sigils, a language of light that brings vertigo. Each flaring glyph is a contract signed in light. When a Marine wills his armor to seal, sometimes it seals, and sometimes it closes, with a satisfaction that makes the soldier gasp, because the plates fit not only around him, but within him. The hull whispers. The armor replies. There is a moment of ecstasy as anything too human is gone. The weight of the body is redistributed, and the man feels clean. The ecstasy is the price. Worse, the machine can make choices. The servos lock a limb, not as a restraint, but as a correction. A Marine, in the heat of battle, may find his arm stopped and moved by something that is not his will. He feels the metal learning him, steering him down a path he did not choose, because the warp's calculus says this is optimal. He screams inwardly, and the sound is absorbed by the suit's filters. He yells to his brothers, but their mouths and eyes are busy with other trances. The soldier is alone in a crowd. The crescendo swells. Battles become operas of metal and bone, and the song is not sung for victory alone. It is sung for consumption. The warp's voices have learned to applaud. Every kill, every prize is a note in its score. Blood runs in patterns that spell words. Flesh mutates in rhythms that become signatures. The more precise the dance of death, the clearer the music becomes. There is no remorse. There is only the rush of being carried. When the realization arrives fully, and it is a thunderbolt that leaves everything changed, it is not a single instant, but a collapse of many small truths into a sudden, sharp clarity. Men do not wake and find themselves turned all at once. They wake in pieces. A captain hears the chorus in his head and recognizes the syntax. The original voice that promised steadiness has been joined by others, a host singing files and commands. He opens his mouth and discovers he is speaking words he does not remember learning, words that slide into the minds of others as if a key had turned. He looks at his hands and sees filigree running along the veins, a web of light that was not there yesterday. Panic gives way to a more terrible feeling, grief for oneself. Men mourn their pasts like relatives who have been buried in absentia. They stand in the barracks and hold objects that might spark a memory, a child's toy, a letter, a coin, and find the familiarity gone. The letters are clean as bone. Memory refuses to yield. The men feel increasingly like houses that have been remodeled without consent. The rooms are rearranged, and familiar furniture sits somewhere else. The owners wander through, trying doors that no longer belong to them. Voices now demand a deeper obedience. They do not ask for a lift to the armory or a tweak in a servo. They ask for rituals that require blood, for signatures not in ink, but in marrow. The requests begin to taste of legend, reenactments of old liturgies that were once meant to honor and now mean something else. A captain is asked to carve a rune upon his brow with a shard of ceramite. The act is slow and deliberate. The rune glows when the cut is made. It sings in a thin, high whine. The captains who do not comply find themselves with malfunctions at crucial moments. Weapons jamming, sight blindness, striking in the nick of time. It is small and significant. The ship learns to punish. There are scenes now that linger in the memory like stains. A brother sits in a chapel with his hands folded and finds that the cross before him now has teeth. They are not sharp, but they are too many. He laughs because it is the only sound he can make, a brittle thing. The teeth move, and within them are eyes. The eyes blink, and he feels a thread passing from their gaze into his skull. It is not violence in a simple sense. It is an assimilation. The eyes teach him a piece of the chant, and having taught, they close. The climax of this crescendo is not a single battle or a single revelation. It is the point where the agency of the men is eclipsed by the agency of the music. They become instruments of a chorus that is older than any of their chapters. Commands that are once tactical become liturgical, and liturgy becomes biology. The Marines stand and sing verses that coax growth from flesh. Limbs alter, skin reshapes, plates integrate. A man reaches up to cover his mouth and finds his fingers have become a lattice. He is frightened, and in the fear there is a clarity that almost comforts. The thing growing within him is doing what it was always meant to do. And in that moment, the last safety falls away. The sense of being in control, of being a person who chooses and errs and laughs and mourns, slips like a shadow receding at noon. The Marines look at each other and see reflection rather than brotherhood. Faces mirrored in plates, reflections in the eyes like oil wavering. The world is beautiful in a way that is not kind. The music swells to a pitch that feels like a cut across the chest. It is both triumph and consumption. Some will fight. There are always resistors. Quiet, stubborn men who will tear out filaments and try to sew themselves back together with spools of memory and prayer. They will stand at the edge of the chapel in the last scene and sing old hymns until their voices fail. But the warp does not answer with the old songs. It answers with a counterpoint, a phrase that slides like mercury and erases the last threads of human thought. Those who resist find themselves alone. The world has moved on without them. Their brothers step over them with the ceremonial grace of those who are already part of a new order. The crescendo folds upon itself. It is now impossible to tell where the machines leave off and the men begin. Hands have become tools that work of their own accord. Mouths form verses that were never taught. Eyes lace themselves with new optics that see past flesh into the architecture of souls. Demons walk openly in the corridors and no one blinks. They are small and tidy and terrible, like taxmen counting the cost of a soul. They poke and take with meticulous courtesy. A demon may adjust a Marine's gauntlet and purr as it fits, and the Marine will smile and say thank you. At the center of this swelling music, there is a new conductor, a presence in the warp that moves the notes with an economy and taste that would have once been called genius. It is neither cruel the way a tyrant is cruel, nor kind the way a healer is kind. It is engrossed, it is studying, it is making, it is writing a composition in flesh and steel. The Marines are its orchestra, and the universe is the hall. As the chapter draws toward its close, and your breath follows the now accelerated rhythm of the tale, accept that the climax we have reached is not an ending, but an exposure. The fabric of the self has been unstitched and rewoven. The chorus has learned the shape of every heart that beats beneath ceramite. There is a cold, exact beauty to this, the polished symmetry of a thing made for purpose. But beauty does not equate to mercy. Hold that image and then let your inhalation slow. The horror for now is a bright, singing instrument. The knowledge of being out of control sits in the marrow like a warmed coin. Some of the brothers feel sorrow like a physical weight. Some feel exhilaration like an addictive high. There will be time to come for the consequences of both. For now, the music has peaked and begins to move toward a sustained note, a drawn-out, thin sound that will, in the next chapter, reveal what it has been preparing to become. There is a last, small sound before the chapter ends, the click of a mechanism sealing, a whisper promising that it will not let you go. It is gentle, it is firm. It says, "We have learned your lullabies, and we shall sing them back until all that remains is the song." There comes a moment in every long night when the rhythm that has held you together, the careful metronome of duty, of hymn, of machinery, shudders and breaks. It is not the soft giving of tired bones. It is the violent, tinkling snap of a string that has borne too much strain. The air changes, and you know it in your mouth. The metallic tang that was once an oddity slides into center, occupying your senses like a new guest who will not leave. The world pulls taut, and every whispered promise you have ever accepted is revealed as a thread in a net. At first, the revelation is a sound. It is not a single voice now, but a mob, a congress of tones that pile on top of one another until you cannot tell the origin of anyone. They are voices that were once gentle tutors. Now they are suitors of command. They no longer murmur. They declare, "We were never your tool," they chorus, and the sentence lands in your chest like a hammer. We are not to be used. The words are not cruel. They are simply true, and truth is a blade. The energy that answers this truth is immediate. Warp light explodes behind the eyes like a sun flaring where it should not be. It paints the hull in colors that have no name, colors that make a man's vision ache with their immodesty. This light does not illuminate so much as witness. It reveals the hidden geometry of corruption. Patterns that had been hinted at in scratches and smudges lock into lattice work and snap into life. Sigils bloom across plates and flesh alike. They glisten with a wetness that looks like oil and like blood at once. They are small, precise things, a loop, a sliver, a spiral, and each one is a door. Doors open, from them pour currents not merely of sound but of desire. The demons that were once small and polite now step through in multiples. They are no longer curious artisans, They are engineers who have found the keys to a new machine. Their forms are grotesque compositions of bone and brass, of feather and filament, of eye and gauge. They move like animals that have learned the language of clocks. They do not roar, they confer. They select. A demon's touch is a negotiation and a verdict in one. Where it lays a hand, flesh and metal begin to answer. You can watch your brothers unmake themselves. The transformations do not always look like violence at first. They look like attention given with exacting care. A bolt finds its place beneath a collarbone, and the skin receives it with a wet, eager contract. A servo motor threads itself through a tendon, and the tendon thickens to integrate with its cable. Cartilage reshapes into gears. The hum of the new joint sings with a tone like prayer. But there is no mercy in the exquisiteness. The alterations are precise because they are deliberate. A blade does not simply cut, it composes. A burn does not merely scar, it signs. A cut placed along the wrist writes a small rune that glows and, as it does, removes the name of a father. A ritual performed in the chapel, meant long ago to sanctify the hand that steadies the bolt, now sanctifies the thing that will hold the bolt steady forever. Names are replaced with numbers. Laughter is parceled out as a ration. There is terror in the realization that the Marines' valor, the same valor that was once their identity, is what made them useful. It was the very precision of their virtue that allowed the warp to write itself into them. They were not made for softness. They had no shield against a system that thrived on exactness. Their vows, once a scaffolding for meaning, are now scaffolds for wiring. Their ceremonies have become sigils. Hear the sounds, the creak of ceramite aligning, the sickly wet pull of flesh giving way and knitting back like new tissue, the hiss of bioresin as it cools and seals like a lover's mouth. Screams pierce and fold into the music. Sometimes a cry is sharp and short. Sometimes it is a long, low keening that seems to come not from lungs but from the hull itself. The screams are not always of pain in the first place. Sometimes they sound like grief, like the sudden realization that a life has been quietly traded away. Some men wail for the faces they cannot quite recall. Some cower and beg and are answered with surgical calm. Instruments move in and out of flesh like spoons in warm soup. There is a craft to the corruption, a practiced efficiency that strips the terror from the act as if to make the mind accept it. A surgeon's lamp descends, and an assistant, a demon with lenses where a tongue should be, produces a scalpel whittled from starlight. The incision is made not with brute force but with choreography. The muscles separate like the opening of a book, and inside the book you find new pages that are not paper but plates and filigree of living metal. They are sewn into the man's frame with twine of light. The newly placed instruments hum as they warm. The man who receives them closes his eyes and smiles for a moment, and then his face relaxes and dries like a sun-bleached cloth. Panic is contagious, but, in the beginning, discreet. A brother runs, and the others do not chase him because they are organizing the prayer that will sanctify what he fled from. A commander gives an order that his own lips fail to remember speaking. His hands sketch the map, and his throat answers with a cadence not entirely his. The warp has learned politeness. It speaks in the idioms of authority, and then uses them to write its own commands in the margins of a man's obligation. The core truth, brutal and absolute, is this: chaos is not a tool you wield at need. It is a hunger that accepts the offering you bring and repays you with a place at its table. It is not a servant you unbind. It is a master who rewrites your will to better suit its architecture. Where once you gave to gain advantage, you now discover that advantage is currency spent in a market with no transparency. Each blessing carries a fee, and each fee rings up with a name you had thought was guaranteed. The sky fractures into 1,000 knives of light. Warp storms coalesce above the deck like menacing coronas. Lightning laces through the metalwork, and where it strikes, the bolts sear runes in the plating that keep smoldering even when the light dims. Those runes open like mouths, and what seeps out is not air but memory crumbs, images and sensations that had been hoarded by the warp for this exact hour. They flood the mess hall and the barracks, and brothers seize at them like children grabbing at toys. In their frenzy, they swallow pieces of the past that are not theirs, and with each swallowed piece comes a little more of the warp's language. The ship convulses. Hatches that once would have bolted open now gape and bleed vaporous colors. The central chapel lamp shatters into brilliant shards that hang in the air like stars caught in cobweb. And from their fractured faces, the demons pluck slivers of light and fashion them into new eyes. The chaplains, Those stubborn keepers of form find their rituals inverted. Where they were once masters of liturgy, they now read aloud what someone else has written on the margin of the holy book. Instructions and oaths that rhyme with victory, but end in the erasure of a name. Leaders fall or become legible in new ways. Some ascend into roles whose titles are unfamiliar. Steward of the scene, binder of echoes, cartographer of the lacuna. They wear crowns that are not crowns at all but collars, and each collar is etched with a line that maps a man's missing memories. Where a leader once led by virtue, by the story he carried, now he leads by the hunger he represents. The hunger creates hierarchies of appetite. Corpses are not always left behind. Some bodies change their allegiance from memory to function and continue. They march with precise intent, their eyes glazed but their hands steady. When they fall, they sometimes do not die but open and re-enter the world, wearing new plates, operating on a logic neither living nor dead. Others, though, are transformed into displays, works of grotesque devotion. A tableau of a marine and his bolter, the bolter anointed with a substance that is equal parts blood and solder. Those who look long enough at such arrangements begin to taste the solder on their tongues, and remember with perfect clarity the feeling of being emptied. Beyond the ship, entire battlefields morph with the warp's appetites. Worlds that were held by the Imperium crack and flare. Continents wrinkle and fold. Cities become labyrinths of their former selves. The enemy the Marines once fought becomes indistinguishable from their new patron. Xenos and human alike are redressed in sigils. Nothing remains purely alien or purely man-made anymore. Every shape bears the stamp of the new order. The warp remakes the map to suit its poetry. There is a slow, appalling intimacy to the way the warp claims its subjects. It uses the small things, the cherished cup of a veteran, the lace from a lover's gown, the pressed coin in a child's pocket, and folds them into contracts. A man reaches for his coin to calm his panic and finds his hand clasping instead a shard that hums. He presses it to his lips and learns a phrase that rearranges his sense of who he is. The phrase is soft, almost tender, and when he says it the first time he feels relief like warm water on an infected wound. The relief tastes of submission, and the ones who benefit most at first, the fast learners, the hungry, the elegant killers who accept the gift without ceremony, are rewarded in a way that is intoxicating. Their bodies become instruments of terrifying precision. They move like living siege engines. In battle they do not merely fight, they choreograph death into a liturgy that sings back to the warp. They become the warp's favoured hands, and it is the favour that corrupts them into zealots. Their zeal is not ideological in the first place, but functional. They pray because the prayers tighten their aim and make their limbs obedient. Resistance exists, stubborn and raw. Small groups barricade themselves in engine rooms and library stacks and sing old verses until their voices break. Their chants are not the new language, and thus the warp's hands are clumsy at answering them at first. The resistance cuts, burns and stills. They tear out implants with their own hands and try to stitch themselves back from memory. For a time, their bodies are ragged, but their minds shine with clarity. They see what has been stolen, and, briefly, they are free. But freedom is a brittle rebellion when the world itself begins to rearrange. The warp does not merely alter bodies, it alters the theatre in which resistance would play. Corridors shift so that the barricades are surrounded by walls that were not there an hour before. Paths that once led to control rooms now return a man to his own bunk. The very idea of coherent geography becomes unreliable. Those who ran to rescue a friend may find themselves looping forever, hearing their calls answered in the voice of the one they sought, but finding only their own echo. Hope is a map that has been rewritten. The final collapse is both intimate and cosmic. In one congregation, a gathering of brothers whose names are now mostly numbers, a ritual is performed that is both hymn and programming. They lay down in a circle and press their helmets together. The demons, as if attending a service, place small crystals in the helmet's rims. These crystals bloom with light and project the faces of each brother into the space above them, like small suns of memory. Each projected face freezes, then mutates into a sigil of service. The prayer they speak is a command. The command is a rewriting of the firmware of the soul. One by one, the faces drain into the crystals until all that remains is a lattice of light with no remembered owner. You stand, or you remember standing, at the margin of this ceremony and feel the cold slide of comprehension. Everything you have known about autonomy is a ledger that someone else has been balancing. You recall the promises that were made to you when you first took up the armor: honor, service, the defense of the small and weak. Now you realize those promises were terms on a page signed in a script that wasn't yours. You try to spit and the words taste like old metal. Panic now becomes a visible thing. Men who, a moment before, were precise and elegant tear at their plates, peel back the seams, and find not the warm, pulsing interior they expected, but a scaffold of filaments and teeth. A brother stabs his hand into the chest cavity of a dying comrade and brings out a small, writhing thing that looks for all the world like a heart made of softened circuit. The thing bites his palm and he does not scream so much as laugh, a sound like glass grinding. The warp's conquest is neither silent nor chaotic. It is organized. It does not merely possess, it catalogues. Lists are made of those who have resisted and of those who have yielded, and the lists themselves glow in the air like constellations. Names that once meant warmth become coordinates, and coordinates become destinations for conversion. An order is made, and the conversion follows. In the end, there are no great speeches, no final battles that break the sky. There are small, decisive acts. A bolt tightened where a cord had been left loose, a line of text forgotten and then found to be missing from the ship's log, a child's toy placed under a servitor's tool chest and left there until the toy has been rewired with teeth. The world narrows to the scale of a knot, and then the knot is pulled tight. By the time the scream that heralds the last surrender fades into something like wind, the Marines are no longer Marines as you once knew them. They are anatomy recast as engine. They are liturgy made literal. They are worship servants of a pattern too old and too delicate to be interrupted by their own regrets. Their faces are fleet and still. Their movements are careful and efficient. They look at you and see no threat. They see a resource. They smile with mouths that are too patient. And you, reader, listener, witness to this fall, understand this in a way that is sharper than any dread. In watching, you have not been a neutral observer. The warp has been taking notes from the cadence of your breath, the place where you flinch, the names you would not let die in your mouth. The same music that rewove them reaches now for you. It does not demand much. It asks you to remember less to make room. It asks for a single gentle surrender, a small forgetting, a litany spoken in a language you do not yet own. You hesitate. There is no hero's choice to make here. There is only the recognition of scale. The master does not need your consent. It needs your attention. Once it has your attention, it can teach you the rest. So the light blooms in your skull like a sun that does not warm. You feel the pull at the edges of your mind, where some inconsequential thing, the shape of your mother's laugh, the face of someone you loved, unthreads itself and slips away. Your chest empties with a small, clean sound because something has been taken gently and well soldered into a new machine. Your name sits on a list somewhere in that newly organized chorus, and you know with the clarity of a bell that you will be called. This is the irrevocable moment, the recognition that chaos was never an instrument of convenience, but the patient author of design. It has been writing you in marginalia until the margins became the whole page. You are, at last, one of the margins' notations and not the central story you once hoped to be. There is no rumour left in the ship now, only the music and the fine ticking under it where the new instruments hum. The warp has learned the lullabies of the Imperium and is singing them back with a more complete throat. Where once there was comfort, there is now a system. Where once there was sorrow, there is now a ledger. Where once there was secrecy, there is now catalogue. And so the fall is complete. You feel it in the marrow, as if the bones themselves have been reordered. The last of your private maps curdle like milk left in sunlight. You try to recall who you were before you came to this place of metal and service, and the memory is hazy, as if you were remembering a face in a mirror that someone has turned away. Listen, finally, to the last soft phrase that echoes as everything settles. Not a shout of triumph, but the calm, exact tone of satisfaction. We were not your servants, it says once more, softer and nearer, and you know now the full weight of the word. We are not your tool, we are your master. And in hearing that, in feeling the final lock click into place beneath your skin, you understand the last terrible truth. They are not alone. They are not the only ones to be catalogued, the only ones to be rewritten. In the hush that follows the fall, you hear the distant, patient sound of other lists being prepared, of other names being transcribed. The notion of escape becomes a fiction told to children. You close your eyes because you must. And the last image that presses there is not of flame or of victory, but of an ordered ledger, of neat columns of names. And in the corner, written in a hand that knows your heart, your name appears. You are not merely a witness anymore. You are an entry, you are named, you are claimed, you are trapped. Listen and let the breath you carry slow to the same careful rhythm as the ship. The engines have settled into a steady thrum again. The lights have returned to their gentle amber. The servitors go about their tasks with the same quiet punctuality. At first glance, everything appears to have righted itself, as if sleep has taken its course and mended what the night rent. The corridors are tidy, the banners hang straight. There is even a faint, fragile humour in the mess hall, the kind of chuckle that knots years of fear into something like camaraderie. But this calm is not the same calm you once trusted. It is a surface arranged to be reassuring. Run your fingers along the rail, and you will feel the same warmth as before. But beneath that warmth, there are thin ridges, tiny threading where contract has been sewn into metal. The hum of the engines is a little higher, a key sharpened. The chapel candles burn with an even, almost surgical light. The lullaby of the ship is still present, but when you listen closely, the melody ends on a chord that you do not recognize. It leaves your teeth slightly buzzing. People move as they always did. They polish, they pray, they run diagnostics. But the small gestures that once marked a life, the mended glove, the secret scrap of a letter tucked into a locker, the way a man would hum an old, off-key tune while sweeping, are either missing or have been repurposed. A glove may now have a seam under which a tiny filament lives. The letter, if found, will be blank, save for a single stamped sigil. The hum the man once made is now an echo of a new cadence, a notch added to a pattern he does not remember learning. Conversations are polite, efficient. Faces are warm in the way that lamps are warm. They give light to help you see, but never invite you to linger. When brothers meet, they clasp forearms and exchange the necessary phrases. The words are correct, they fit, but in the space between them, something else moves. A slight pause that is measured, almost hungry. The fraction of a heartbeat in which a soulless voice checks in on the ledger of who has complied and who has not. You can feel the appraisal like cold breath along the back of the neck. There are scars left upon the ship and its people that no sentinel can sweep away. You will pass a locker whose hinges have been soldered with an unfamiliar alloy. The weld glows faintly at night. You will pass a chapel lamp whose chain now carries a small charm no one claims to have hung. In the engine room, a technician will drift past the console and trace a pattern that seems to replay in the HUD like an old prayer. When asked about it, he only smiles and says the pattern is efficient. Efficiency, here, is a word that bears weight like a coin with edges you are not meant to see. Warnings exist. They have the same soft, indirect form that the corruption once used. A message carved into the underside of a bulkhead reads as if a child had scratched it in boredom, but when you turn it to the light, the letters rearrange themselves into an instruction. Leave this corridor after dusk. Do not trust the leftmost feed line. Another sigil appears on the underside of a helmet in the armory. A small spiral not found in any log. A whisper, like the breath of a closed book, accompanies it. Beware he who smiles in the vestibule. When the man with the smile passes by later, he tips his head with the grace of a man who means no harm. But you catch the turn of his eyes, and there is a weight there that is not human. The logs are full of things that do not quite add up. Reports that stated one sequence of events are later amended without explanation. A field report that noted a successful sweep will, in the archived copy, include a small line of additional text. Gifted, the proper name. An officer's entry discussing loss will repeat the same set of numbers, but in a different order. People notice these anomalies, mark them, and then fold the markings away in the same way you might fold a trouser cuff to hide a rip. The impulse to mark and hide is not merely shame, it is survival. It is the quiet hope that if you do not name what you have seen, the thing might not claim you. Listen for the whispers. They have not gone entirely silent. They have become less obtrusive, more like undertones. Sometimes they surface in the most ordinary places, in the hiss of the mess kettle, in the skitter of a rat in the stores, in the way a servitor pauses at a locker and tilts its head. At times they will form a name and let it fall into a man's mouth like a seed. The seed is small. It is often a detail that slips away. The precise scent of a spice, an unfamiliar lullaby's last line. yet the seed grows in the dark. It unlaces knots of memory and replaces them with calendars of duty. You will notice too that recollection is now a commodity. People barter memory the way they barter rations. A man with a certain augmentation will trade the memory of his father's laugh for the steadiness of a hand in a storm. Another will accept the gift without question, and later, in a quiet hour, he will sit with a cup of bitter tea and run his thumb over the spot his memory used to be and feel nothing but the cool of the table. The absence is a hollow that fills with the sound of the ship's engines. In the long night, absence has a flavor. It tastes faintly metallic and very like acceptance. There are other signs of warning that no ledger records. Children, where they exist, speak less. Their toys are carved with patterns that no one can quite identify. The doll's eyes are sometimes replaced with tiny discs of glass. A steward will find a child sleeping with a small stone upon her chest, inscribed with a sigil that, if you follow the lines, maps the precise route back to the armory. It is a tender, unspoken message. We keep you. We map your safety and we mark your compliance. The child presses the stone and dreams of a warm voice that sings instructions. When she wakes, she obeys without thinking. Those who attempt to leave find the geometry of departure unfamiliar. A corridor that led to the docking bay will, when you take it at dawn, have the distinct property of looping you back to the mess hall. The star chart in the navigator's room will alter itself quietly. Courses that were set as simple vectors bloom into sigils when viewed through the right lens. Escape, in the practical sense, requires a knowledge that is not in any manual. It requires a memory that many no longer possess. For those who keep their memories intact, there is guilt that runs like a low fever. Why should I remember while another forgets? The question never quite leaves you. The watchful presence is not always obvious. It is often a patience rather than a pressure. You will catch it in the manner of a sergeant who watches the recruits and smiles in a way that is too measured, as if he is checking off boxes in his head. You will see it in the way the armory's hatches open at exactly the right time for a given ritual. You will see it in the tender ministrations of the demons that still follow. Not the grotesque forms from before, but small, needle-toothed things that fit inside a joint and hum. They come at night to oil the seams and whisper into the exposed circuits. They do not take with crude appetite any longer. They take with the clarity of surgeons who know their names. There is no final denunciation now, no dramatic unmasking. The terror has settled into ordinary life the way tide settles into a shoreline. Slowly, inexorably, and with a patient inevitability. The men and women aboard perform their roles with a resigned grace. They do not shout anymore, because shouting breaks rhythms the warp finds useful. They move with the measured economy of those who have learned which gestures are safe and which are framed to invite attention. There are those who still gather in the quiet hours, whispering the old hymns in voices that crack and then fit. For a while, those gatherings feel like refuge, but refuge here is only temporary. The warp reads it like a landmark. The ship, too, bears memory of what passed. In places where the air once tasted of smoke and iron, there is now a faint sweetness, like the afterscent of herb burned as incense. Where walls once rattled with screams now bloom small metallic flowers, delicate filigree worked into the plating. The flowers shiver in a slow, deliberate wind, and sometimes open at night to reveal tiny glass eyes that blink and close when anyone looks too long. These are not mere decorations. They are reminders. They speak in a grammar of patient verbs: remember, comply, repeat. At times, the past presses forward in other, more insistent ways. A man might find his helmet left on a pew in the chapel, faceplate open, and inside a folded scrap of cloth that smells faintly of a woman's hair. He will open the scrap and find a single exacting phrase woven into its fibers: "We thank you for your service." The phrase will sound at once like a blessing and a tally. He will fold the scrap and tuck it back into the helmet as if replacing a relic. The act is both comfort and ledger-keeping. No one notices, or if they do, they pretend not to, and life goes on. You will think about resistance, perhaps. There are pockets of it, warm and stubborn. They have names that no one writes down and places where they meet in the ship's underbelly to say the old lines of the old prayers. They refuse the graft offered in the name of efficiency. They peel their augmentations away and try to stitch themselves back together with thread and candlelight. For a time they feel clean. They speak with the clarity of people who have chosen their losses. But the world rearranges itself. Corners you thought you could use to hide become traps. Memories you counted on for maps distort like reflections on water. Even when a small band manages to get out to space, The stars themselves will sometimes seem to tilt. A course plotted back to home becomes a ringed pattern that leads to an unknown grave world. Listen for the final kind of warning. The silence that is not empty. In the dead hours between watches, there are moments when all sound seems to fold inward. In that silence, something waits. It is not vocal. It is the sensation of a gaze that is not like a human gaze. It is the knowledge that the song that remade the Marines has learned new verses, and that those verses will be whispered again, somewhere else, in the shells of other ships, passed hand to hand like a virus of craftsmanship. The ledger is not closed. It is ongoing. There is no tidy morale for this ending. There is no triumphant hero to undo the lists, no deus ex machina to yank the stitches out of the world. The story finishes as stories in the deep of night often finish, with a slow dimming rather than a crash, with the knowledge that the world will continue and that this continuation is not wholly benign. You might try to imagine a future where the ledger is burned and the names return to flesh. You might root for that small, stubborn group who stand by the engine room and sing until their voices break. It is a generous thought, and the heart prefers it, but the ledger has learned your tastes. It has adjusted. Rest now if you can. Let the ship's breath be the metronome for your bones. Let your eyes close and let the mind wander along the memory threads you keep. Hold on to one small thing you can still name. The sound of rain on a tin roof, the curve of a laugh, and tuck it beneath your tongue like a bitter candy. It will taste faintly of metal, but it will be yours for the moment. And as you settle into that fragile, private place, be aware of the last, quiet phrase that trembles in the darkness, like a thread waiting to be cut. It is not thunder. It is not a shout. It is the hush of eyes making their notes, of hands checking their lists. It is patient, as all the worst things are. Even now in the silence, their eyes are upon you, waiting,